Well, it's Wednesday, March 25th, and believe it or not, it is my 20th wedding anniversary today. And,
Woohoo!
and we are absolutely not going anywhere because we can't. And so today I'm going to do a podcast with Maggie Romo. And Maggie, welcome to our podcast, or our video podcast, I should say.
Thanks, Pastor.
Yeah, thanks for coming. The first question I want to ask Maggie is, how did you find this funky little church?
It was little, way back when, 20 years ago.
Was it 20 years?
I was attending a church, a Christian church in Santa Monica, and it was very quaint and beautiful, with about 25 people
Okay.
and in attendance. And unfortunately, every Sunday that I'd go to church, and I was there for quite a while, I'd fall asleep during the sermon, and I was embarrassed and feeling just crazy about that happening to me. And so I talked to my husband, Raymond, and I realized it was a church right across the street from me. And I'm not sure that this is correct or not, but sometimes I'd hear loud Mexican singing from the church. And I don't know what day it was, but I was assuming that church was shared. And it's the large church. And so one day I told my husband, well, I'm going to go and sit in and see what's going on. And it was a small gathering. And you were there, Pastor, and Korak, and Jana, and Brooke was there, and later on came Pastor Reuben. Right. But anyway, I felt alert and receiving the word, and so I invited Raymond to join us. And sure enough, we have been there ever since. It's been 20 years. Because I remember trying to figure out the date. It was Valentine's Day, close to it, and you were saying you were engaged, and so that's my timeline that I got.
So that was,
yeah,
because I got married in obviously in 2000, so 20 years ago. So yeah, that was, so you probably, wow, that is a long time ago, Maggie.
Sure.
You've seen a lot happen in this church.
Oh,
and
yeah.
Ray, if you notice, like I was talking to your husband a few days ago, I need to get my hair cut. And I know like all the barbers, and I'm going, oh man, I'm going to look like a hippie. So hopefully sometimes I can get my hair cut. So Ray, so how long have you been married?
Well, in January, the 29th, we celebrated 20 years, double that, in 54 years.
54 years you've been married. Yes. And so, tell us how you met Ray. It would be an interesting story, because I don't think anyone knows your story. How you guys met, how old were you, what were the situations you got together? Tell us about that.
Well, that's kind of an interesting story. My friend sang in a band back then, and her boyfriend was one of the guitar players, and the band was from the West Side, and my friend and I are from East Los Angeles. So we went to a Christmas dance in El Monte Legion Stadium, and while I was there and she was performing, I saw Raymond in the crowd, and we got together, we danced a little and talked to each other and said we'd meet again the following week or so at another gathering where the band was performing. Then in those days, you had live band music, and it was fun to travel around with them.
You were both these incredible dancers then.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
How old were you guys when you first met?
Well, I was 16. Hold on. No. I was just turned 17, and we met in November. And no, it was December.
Okay.
We met in December, and he was 19. And so at that point, I did have a little girl, my daughter Tracy, she at that point in November, she was 1. She had just turned 1.
So you had
And
a
I was
daughter at
going,
16 years old.
I was 16. Yes, correct. You're right. And so then I, I was, I guess I was looking, that's the word, looking for someone who could make me a legitimate, because in those days, illegitimate children I was not really I felt like I wasn't a citizen, that I didn't belong in this world that had such judgment of people like me who had a child already.
Okay.
So when I met Raymond, and he loved children. If he could have had a dozen, he would have. But yeah, we met, and then we married shortly thereafter, and
How old was
it
he?
was really fast. Pardon me?
You were 17 when he got married, right?
Yes, 17. Yes,
And he was
he was 19.
19.
Yeah,
So
and
that's
he had a car. Woohoo! Yeah, he had it all, and more than that, Pastor, he had a set of parents. He had a mother and a father. Yeah.
Wow. So
So
okay, let's go back to that, because as a 15-year-old and 16-year-old, when you're seeking for value, I would assume,
yes.
and as a young person, how, as a 16-year-old girl looking for value somewhere because they're not being valued from home, I'm assuming there was shame, a lot of shame that you're struggling with. What goes through a 16-year-old's mind or heart when you're saying they don't even feel like a citizen?
Yeah, it was a lot of desperation. I felt like I grew up in a home without a father,
Okay,
and my mother was, for the most part, absent as well.
right.
My dad left her with 4 children, and young children. I was 5 when he left, and so yeah, she struggled, and yet she was lonely too. So anyway, because I thought the person I was involved with, in my mind, I had the Cinderella story. Oh, he's going to marry me, and we'll be happily ever after in a place all our own. That never happened, never came to be. And so at that point, even going to school, because I knew I need to get an education. I knew that I did love school,
Right.
but I was like so young, and people at school were pointing fingers at me and saying, "You had a baby," and
Are you really? So you were publicly shamed?
yes, yes.
That's horrible.
Yeah, it is. Those were the times. It was
Yeah.
terrible.
Well, and the thing is, even people get publicly shamed too for today. So I don't think it's changed much, because I remember when I was a child, I was publicly shamed for my size of my lips, my
Oh,
tremor. I was called the moving earthquake. I mean, it
oh.
just seemed like that was the thing. Was
Mm-hmm.
at that age, junior high, beginning of high school, it was just a brutal time
Yes.
emotionally, if you can make it through. But the cool thing is, you finished high school.
Yeah, in adult school, though. I
Adults.
had married Raymond,
Okay.
moved over to the West Side,
All right.
and then I finished in adult school. I didn't have much more to go.
Okay.
Yeah, so I finished going to the adult school. I'm actually an alumni of Venice High School.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Where they filmed Grease?
Yes, of course. Yippee.
So,
Yeah, so I was able to do that, and
and you went to college.
I went to college because at that time, God's grace and blessing, I was working at UCLA Chicano Study Center. That was a big movement back then in the late 60s.
Mm-hmm.
And I happened to get a job there as a clerical, and they were recruiting. They were recruiting minorities, and God had a plan. He said, we're taking you in. And I was able to, it wasn't all that difficult, really.
Right.
I think because I had such a love of learning and reading, but I did have a lot of gaps though in maturity and in schooling, because even though I was I learned through books. I didn't learn the worldview. It was my puny little worldview that really, you want to be social, you need to have those graces
Right.
and you have to have those interactions. Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's fascinating. So you said at the beginning of this interview, you said, when you were 15, 16 years old, you bought in this concept of the romance of getting married and all that stuff, and just this bubble that are the movies that we watch.
Oh yeah.
Now you've been married for 54 years. Has that girl's opinion at 16 years old changed since being married 54 years?
Oh, dramatically. Yes. Yes, it has. Because, it's called growing up, and I still wasn't sure what that meant. And although I had a lot of education, college and so forth, I don't, my role models, my mother and my father not being around, uh, didn't, it was like a journey to, uh, stumbling and challenges and uh, and emotional and spiritual emptiness.
Mm,
I kept looking for it, but I wasn't finding it.
right.
And it was through finally a 12-step program called Al-Anon that helped me connect. Now, mind you, I was always a believer in God,
Oh,
always and forever believed in Him.
yeah.
But I still felt separated. And so through Al Anon, their 12 steps made me understand, helped me to understand how people are,
Mm,
how I am, most of all.
mm,
And so I learned things like acceptance, which is a huge part of my relationship with Raymond and others, and learn to be a little more quiet,
right.
take the pause, live life just like I heard over and over again, one day at a time. And so that all came to be. It was a practice, no doubt about it. But I think the most important part of all was to trust my Lord and Savior. The trust. I had everything else except that one little component.
And
And
that's a
then when I
hard
finally
component.
trusted him, yeah, when I had it, it came into being, boy, I'm ready. I'm
Right.
ready for whatever comes our way.
So what advice, I mean, I don't know if you watch young people in their marriages and you're going, oh my goodness, I remember when I was that age.
Hmm.
And you're just, can you speak in somebody's life when they're young, or are they unteachable sometimes? And you just have to sit back and say, you'll figure this out. Or what advice would you give somebody that's really struggling in the first 5 years of marriage or 6 years of marriage? What is some of their perspective obviously needs to change.
Yeah, that's so true because Raymond hasn't changed since I've known him. We
There's
were
no
on this.
maturity.
Yeah, he's a wonderful person. He really is. He's a good father, and but he went through his. He has demons that he struggles with,
Right.
and I kept wanting to think that I could change that. I would make these ideas of, well, if that doesn't happen, I had all these what are they called, borders,
Mhm.
and I said, okay, if he messes up on that one, then that's it, I'm leaving. And
Right.
if he does this, now I'm out the door.
Right.
And no, but it wasn't that way. It wasn't supposed to be that way. He is who he is, and I am happier because I accept who he is for most of the time. It's not perfect. I
Mhm.
accept him, and but more than that, he he is part of my God's plan, my purpose in life.
Mhm.
He really is. And so I've got to remember that. And by doing that, I don't house any bitterness or anger. And yeah, I go to bed with a peace of mind.
Yeah.
What it is, yeah.
No, and it's interesting. I think too, I would love to uh, ask this question too. For somebody that struggled with shame and guilt and non-self acceptance, how do you work yourself through that? Do you still struggle with shame at times, or was there one of those aha moments that just came in your life and go, I am a child of God whom he's well pleased. I'm a daughter of God. When did that click in, or has it clicked in?
Yeah, not too long ago, Pastor. I'm telling you, I'm in my 70s, and I am almost almost like afraid to say that it took me this long, but it's okay. It took me this long to have that spiritual uplifting and happiness. It's
Right.
just amazing. Yeah, it's just and sometimes, yeah, sometimes it happens that I get down, and then I tell myself, well, wait a minute. Uh, did I do something wrong? Was there something that, like everybody else, I want to be liked.
Yeah.
Did I do something wrong? And I think about it, and I said, not to my knowledge, or if I did, I'll ask for forgiveness. And then I got to let it go. Just have to let it go, because I
Right.
don't want that bringing me down.
So for you at 16 years old, it was until your late 60s you learned to let go
Yes.
of the shame.
Yes, that's right.
So that's a long time of holding that
Oh,
in.
yeah. And I was molested too, Pastor. I was molested. And
I
the funny
know,
thing
yeah.
is about that, and nothing's funny about it, but nonetheless, the part is I have forgiven those people that molested me. I
How do
forgive
you
them.
do that? I
How do
mean,
I do
I
it?
get it because I don't know how old you were when you were molested, and it's interesting. Yesterday we were talking about that with Zach. He just brought up that he was molested, and I even said that in the interview. There's a lot of people out there, and I had no idea the next day that I had no idea that you were molested. So let me click here because I've never been molested, and I think that is probably the worst thing. I mean, I think it's evil.
Hmm.
How do you do this? How do you
Because I'm sorry, Pastor, but
oh, go ahead.
the forgiveness is for me. Because otherwise, the flip side of that is hatred, anger, bitterness.
Okay.
And I had enough of that in my life. I had such a chip on my shoulder, especially toward my mother, who was supposed to have protected me.
Oh yeah, that's true.
But it was her boyfriend, and it was a couple of relatives. So it wasn't just a one incident thing. It happened like at least 3 times in my life as a young child, under anywhere from 8, 9, 10, 11 years old. And when I began to understand what forgiveness is, and that's through Christ,
Right.
and I keep at the forefront his 2 greatest commandments,
Mhm.
which is, love him. I'm putting it in a little nutshell here. Love him, and love others.
Wow.
And so that overcame all that bitterness and all that anger I had. I tell you, I would grit my teeth toward my mother every time I would see her, and here she was dying of cancer, and I never got around to forgiving her until after her death. Now,
Really?
after her death, I did forgive her,
Okay.
and I forgave myself for being so ticked off at the world. But I'm happier now. I'm much happier. I'm happier with my grandkids, happier with the world. Yeah,
Well,
my family.
let's focus on some of the stuff that's giving you joy. Tell us how
Mhm.
many. So, how many children? How many grandchildren do you have?
I have 2 children, 2 grown adult children.
Okay.
My son gave me 2 grandchildren, and the daughter gave me a great grandson. And then my daughter gave me 4 grandchildren. And from there, I have 8 great grandchildren. So, yeah, total
Eight,
of 14. Yeah.
eight great grandchildren.
Yes, yes, yes.
Now, ever since I met you, and I always think this is where your heart shows the most. People in your age, in their 70s, they usually live alone. They usually take life easy. They watch, I don't know what retired people do, but they enjoy it. You don't do that. Your house is constantly alive by you guys' choice. It's not like, it just seems like the last 10 years or 15 years I've known you, it is almost like a hotel of people in need. Tell us,
Mm-hmm.
and where did that come from? Because most people don't do that. They will give a couple of nights to a hotel, but you don't do that. You just, hey, come live with us.
Yes. Well, a lot of that, believe it or not, is my husband. And I think part of it, excuse me, is that he grew up with a large family. I mean, there was all kinds of people at his house. So to have people at our house, I don't think it bothers him. And he said a few things very profound, like one of my granddaughters when she had her first child, and he said, "Let her stay here so that you give her a home." Excuse me, Pastor. And what are you going to have them roaming around in the streets? It was kind of like that, and no, we didn't want that. And so, excuse me, Pastor.
That's okay. You're good. Don't begin
So
to
we still have that child with us. She's 16 years old now, and she's made the choice to live with us.
Right.
A couple of old people, but anyway, she's got her own room, and she seems to be okay, and she's progressing. So that's one of them that lives with it. We've had a revolving door forever.
Right.
My daughter and her children always needed, let me back up here. It appeared that they needed help.
Right.
And so there was always room wherever we were to have family and in particular family, to have a safe place.
Right. So, one thing that we haven't touched on, you have all this joy, but I think there was one moment that just shook your life is when Raymond had a stroke.
Oh, yeah.
And so, do you remember when he had the stroke? When did he have it?
I think it's been at least
6
years now, 7 years.
And I remember visiting him at the Ronald Reagan Hospital, wasn't it?
Yeah, at UCLA. Yes, that's correct.
UCLA Hospital. And it was a major stroke. It wasn't.
Oh,
it wasn't.
Yes. The doctor said, go call your family. He has an 8 out of 10 chances of not making it.
Okay. So you obviously you were married 49 years then.
Mm-hmm.
So that was a long time.
Mm-hmm.
How did that shake your life, or did it shake? Obviously, it shook your life. What were you going through at that time?
Well, I denial.
Okay.
I got a hold of my son. My daughter was not living in this area at that time, so my son was the closest. And we went to go see how Raymond was doing. So when the doctor said, please call your family, he had a huge blood clot in his brain. Mm-hmm. And the denial was no, that's not, maybe it's true, but it's not, nothing's going to happen, and they were doing an experimental drug, some kind of injection to break up the clot. Mm-hmm. And so Raymond was paralyzed when he went in. He could not move, he could not talk. Yeah. And so he, when they took him out of whatever it was, the room to give him his medication, and took him to a recovery room, I saw him moving his legs. Mm-hmm. I said, oh my gosh. He was trying to, you're almost naked at that point. And he was trying to cover himself with his legs kicking, trying to get the sheet underneath him. And I thought, oh, no, he's going to be fine.
He's going to be fine. Yeah. And so, and it's interesting because I remember him visiting. He was trying to tell me, I will be at church on Sunday.
Yeah.
I will be at church on Sunday. And I'm thinking of that. I don't know if it was a Monday or Tuesday. I was going, there's no way. There's no way in the world this guy's going to be in church. I mean, like eight times out of 10, they're telling him he's going to be dead. He's paralyzed, his full body. And so, sure enough, that boy showed up at church, limping, and hardly could speak.
That's right. It affected his speech most of all.
and it's still effective somewhat today.
Yes.
And
Yes. And also his right leg, he limps. Yeah, that's from the stroke as well.
yeah, but
So,
it's funny because he let me drive I think he has a TR6.
yes.
And he tells me, "Can you drive me in my TR6? Because that's his babe. That's his babe.
That's his other wife. Yes, Pastor.
That's his mister." So he actually let me drive it, and we drove for a couple of times. But that boy hasn't let me drive in that car yet since.
No.
That was 6 years ago. But he said I was good at shifting. So anyway, to close this up, obviously we're all on this not lockdown, but we're all stuck in our homes. And you were telling me a few days ago your perspective and how do you find peace in a situation like this when we watch the news all the time? And so looking at what we've talked about throughout your life, what is the proper perspective that you have that's helping you go through these times?
Well, basically sharing whatever I can, emotional, spiritual. I always, my bottom line is the Lord. Turn to the Lord. He will answer. He will protect. He will figure it out. Because I can't figure it out. But I do know the rules. The rules are to love one another, help one another, and in being an encourager. I tell the mom of the two little babies I take care of, a 2-year-old, 4-year-old, she's distressed right now. She's not feeling well. She doesn't have a job. The kids were sick. I said, don't worry, just turn to the Lord. Because
Right.
it says in the Bible, what good is worrying? What good is it? Do you trust God? Yeah, I do. Then why are you worrying? Yeah, so
I
it's
know.
one day at a time, Pastor.
You're much more mature than I am because it's so easy to worry. And somebody even told me worry and prayer are simply focusing on different
Yes,
things.
that's
And
right.
so we definitely need God still on the throne,
That's right.
and that this too shall pass. And I honestly believe that God is using this, didn't cause it,
Yes,
but God is using it to just adjust our priorities.
that's right.
And it's
I
interesting
say
as
the
I
same
talked
thing.
about this. This is during Lent, which
Yeah.
areas that you need to give up. And talking about,
Uh-huh.
we're
Yeah,
forced to give up a lot of stuff.
that's right.
Really find our identity in Christ. And
That's right.
and I'm looking forward. I keep saying this in the podcast. I'm really looking forward to going back to church.
Yes.
Church.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so I'm excited about it. Thank you so much, Maggie. I appreciate it. And thank you for listening to or watching our video podcast. And I'll see you guys tomorrow. Bye-bye.
Bye.